24. Sustaining the architecture. Protecting coherence as the organization evolves. Once emotional alignment becomes identity, the challenge shifts. Building coherence is one kind of work, sustaining it is another entirely. In global organizations, alignment is never a static achievement. It is a dynamic equilibrium, vulnerable to subtle changes, a leadership transition, a reorganization, a period of rapid growth, a crisis, or even a single region drifting slightly off rhythm. Emotional architecture does not remain stable by accident. It remains stable because leaders protect it intentionally. Sustaining coherence requires vigilance, but not the kind that comes from suspicion. It is a watchfulness grounded in care, a continual noticing of how meaning travels, how tone evolves, where emotional friction arises, and how the organization's internal climate shifts over time. Leaders who sustain alignment do not wait for signs of fracture, they anticipate them. They read the emotional atmosphere of the organization the way sailors read wind and tide, instinctively, continuously, and without the need for dramatic announcements. One executive described this as feeling for the faintest tremors. He meant that even small behavioral changes, an unusual silence, a region asking clarifying questions more frequently than usual, a slight change in the speed of escalation, were signals. Not problems, but signals. Indicators that the emotional architecture needed attention. He learned to respond early, before these tremors could harden into drift. This responsiveness became a stabilizing force that kept the organization coherent even as it navigated rapid expansion. Sustaining emotional alignment also requires leaders to maintain their own emotional discipline. Alignment begins at the emotional center of the organization, and that center is the leader. When leaders lose stability, the organization feels it quickly. When leaders maintain it, the organization absorbs it. This does not mean leaders must be unwavering pillars of serenity. It means they must remain aware of how their emotional state travels. A tired tone, a rushed message, an ambiguous silence, these small signals can create ripples if not contextualized. One global CEO adopted a simple practice, narrating emotional context. If she was speaking quickly because she had just come from an intense meeting, she said so. If her tone was clipped because she had limited time, she acknowledged it. If she was uncertain, she distinguished her uncertainty from pressure. This transparency prevented her emotional state from becoming misinterpreted as organizational instability. Her small habit of contextual communication became a protective layer for alignment. Sustaining coherence also involves reinforcing predictable rituals. Rituals are not mere routines, they are the emotional metronomes of global systems. Weekly leadership calls, cross-regional check-ins, structured reflection sessions, shared language around urgency or escalation, these rituals stabilize the emotional rhythm of the organization. They anchor meaning. They keep interpretation aligned. When organizations drift from these rituals, coherence begins to weaken not because the rituals had operational value, but because they had emotional value. Rituals are the heartbeat of alignment. A global engineering firm learned this when a new leadership team reduced the frequency of cross-functional dialogue sessions, believing they could streamline communication. Within months, tone began to drift. Interpretation varied more widely. Silence grew heavier. Teams felt slightly less connected. When the organization reinstated the rituals, the emotional climate stabilized again. What they had removed was not a meeting, it was a rhythm. Another essential aspect of sustaining coherence is protecting psychological safety. Alignment thrives when teams feel safe enough to surface confusion, misinterpretation, or early signs of drift. It erodes when people hide uncertainty. In coherent organizations, psychological safety becomes a communal responsibility. People name issues not because they fear consequences, but because they trust the shared commitment to clarity. Leaders nurture this by responding to uncertainty not with criticism, but with curiosity. A regional director once explained how one response from her changed the culture of her team. When I brought up a concern, he didn't rush to fix it. He asked how I was experiencing it. From that moment, speaking up felt like part of my job, not a risk. This shift, from correction to curiosity, is one of the quiet foundations of sustained alignment. Sustaining alignment also means acknowledging transitions. When leadership roles change, when strategies evolve, when new regions join the organization, the emotional architecture is vulnerable. People begin searching for new cues. Tone recalibrates. Hierarchy expectations shift. In these transition moments, alignment must be tended with extra care. Leaders should not assume coherence will automatically adapt. Coherence must be reaffirmed. One global organization learned this during the transition to a new CEO. Instead of assuming alignment would endure, the outgoing and incoming CEOs co-led meetings for several months, gradually blending their tones, styles, and emotional signals. This overlap created continuity, allowing teams to internalize the new emotional rhythm without disruption. The transition became an example of how emotional architecture can be protected through intentionality rather than left to chance. Sustaining coherence also requires leaders to defend it against drift disguised as innovation. Not all new ideas support alignment. Some unintentionally introduce emotional inconsistency. A new communication channel, a sudden shift in language, an experimental leadership style in one region, these can fracture emotional coherence if not contextualized. Innovation must be integrated, not merely launched. Coherence does not mean resisting change, it means absorbing change through shared meaning. Finally, sustaining alignment requires leaders to see coherence as a form of stewardship. Emotional architecture is not owned by any one leader. It is inherited from one generation of leadership to the next. Leaders become temporary guardians of the organization's emotional identity. Their role is to strengthen it, protect it, and hand it forward better than they found it. One senior leader captured this beautifully when he said, "We are not building a culture for ourselves. We are building a culture the next generation can trust." In global organizations, sustaining alignment is not an act of maintenance. It is an act of care. It is the recognition that coherence, once achieved, is a living system that must be nurtured. When protected, it becomes one of the most valuable organizational assets. When neglected, it erodes quietly, invisibly, until drift becomes visible again. The next chapter begins to draw the book toward its conclusion, exploring what emotionally aligned organizations look like at their peak, not as ideals, but as mature, living systems with distinct signatures.